Everybody, welcome to another Sunday Trialogue with my co-hosts, Ethan, the fourth initiate, and Ricardo Calvario. Welcome. Tell them where they can find you guys.
Well, peace on earth, everyone. Great to be here. Ethan Indigo Smith on social media, easy to find. Constantly writing a bunch of articles out there and some books, and honored to be here with you guys.
Absolutely. So my name is Ricardo Calvario, and you can find me at the @ that is on the screen at Ricardo Calvary1 on X. And I will also like to promote Institute for Natural Philosophy that I'm associated with, and Universe Unveiled podcast, and Institute for Natural Philosophy, Academia Edu, and YouTube. We also has started a new podcast, this time all male, to balance the all female Universe Unveiled. It's called Shaman and the Philosopher. It's done by me and Jason, or Shaman771. So looking forward to it, and looking forward to our conversation today. Thank you for having me one more.
Thank you for being here. So on my Monday Alchemy show, I have a list of materials that you should probably get. So if you guys want, check that out tomorrow. And also, you know about my show on Thursdays called Headless and Magical Mailbag. Check that out as well. So did anybody bring any topics that they wanted to discuss first? Let's go to Ethan.
Sure.
Well, I am caught slightly unprepared, but I wanted to mention the whole idea essentially of assumptions and repetition, which I think we as humans like to do, and we'll see this play out a lot of times in the alternative media, if you will, where and just in general, where I feel like we're so focused on finding a nuanced perception or a nuanced thought that will really veer off course entirely, and or as I started off with in the beginning, how we will repeat things without really giving it much thought, the actuality or the implication of what we're talking about. We can see this occur frequently in phraseology that people kind of just put forth as almost as appendages to conversations. One that I focused on in my book, Marijuana and the Prohibition of the Divine Feminine, is that the oldest profession is a certain thing. Everyone knows what it is, right? And people will casually remark, oh, well, the oldest profession is prostitution, yada, yada. And again, the implication of that is degradation of women, certainly. It's also protection or an umbrella to what is actually probably the oldest profession, and began the idea of there being prostitution, which is the man form of prostitution, and that is soldiers, right? They're the first, people who are used in their totality for money, right? So it's the implications of that phrase are to kind of put forth an umbrella upon soldiering and also belittle women. And we repeat it without much thought. And another thing that I've heard more relative to, I want to say New Age BS, but a newer kind of preponderance of perspective related to what is often kind of categorized in New Age thinking, which I often am accused of being New Age, but I pursue Old Age, right? I pursue Tai Chi, qigong, old writings, old philosophy, and the integration thereof, not New Age BS. And often I think they get conflated. But one idea that I've heard in respect to this New Age mode of thinking is when you say if, like, oh, if only this were that way or that were this, or if. And I wrote an article called "The Big If," where that's where I start by saying if marijuana and hemp were legal. And I feel like people are so caught up in this New Age dogma, if you will, that they'll kind of throw out what they think is a nuanced idea without really thinking about it, because they heard it before and they're going to repeat it because they thought it was nuanced, and then they're going to be known for this nuanced thought, which is don't focus on the what ifs and what could be, but focus on the present. And that is actually not a bad idea. But as a rule, if you examine it, it's horrible, because there's no way that we make a new direction or new invention without contemplation of if I go this way, or if things were different in some manner, if my government wasn't so authoritarian, if you will. Not that we live in such a world where I have to say that, right? But these ideas are it's a good idea to be in the present moment, but it's not a good idea to demand that no one be outside of the present moment, especially in consideration of new invention and new direction. So there's all kinds of these little notes of New Age BS that are out there, and I just wanted to throw that one out there and just have people consider their own pursuit of nuanced thinking and their own repetition of thoughts that they might have heard before, because we tend to do that. And I'm just calling out the idea of the oldest profession and the idea of being in the present and not thinking of if as two that are worthy of criticism. So I just wanted to show that.
Thank you. I want to ask this question. So if there was a scale of New Age BS, like a polar scale where you've got one side is the absolute woo, and then the other side is more like realistic New Age stuff, how do you think that would shake out? What would go on that ultra woo, totally unrecognizable as reality side versus the other side, which is sort of where we're at right now as a society?
Yeah, well, I think there's in these different older traditions, there are often there are perpetuators of lies, if you will, in yoga and in martial arts and in all kinds of psychic woo stuff. I think it comes down to show and prove, certainly, because a lot of people will make claims on a lot of things. And that goes to philosophy as well. How useful is it without being so dogmatic that you dig yourself into a hole? Like the idea of one shouldn't think about if, one should only be in the now. Well, it's a good idea in general, certainly, but as a dogmatic rule, always, you just fell into a kind of enclosure that's not really helpful. So I think it comes down to show and prove. But yeah, I think there are going to always be these liars in different fields, certainly.
Well, what I hear you saying is that there's a link between people who are so airy-fairy spiritual that they're not really having any connection to the material world, right? Because they're not willing to show and prove, so they're kind of out there. And then at the same time, there's the being overly grounded with dogmatic, only this way works approaches. And in some ways, yeah, a lot of that belongs on one end of the spectrum because that dogmatic approach, that's very common and people don't even realize they're doing it, most of the time. They're like, I'm non-dogmatic, I'm non-dual, I'm non-whatever. And then it's like, really? It sounds like it from your philosophy that there's a lot of that going on there. What do you think, Ricardo?
Well, I was kind of relating this to my article entitled "What is Reality?" And this is underscored then with "And does it matter?" So, because if we focus too much just trying to figure out what reality is, we cease to experience as it is presented. It's good to have the questioning of the of what is, but not at the expense of the moment. It's like in Star Wars, Anakin turns to Obi-Wan and says, "But Yoda says I must be mindful of the future," and Obi-Wan responds to him, "Not at the expense of the present." So, and I'm just going to read the final of my article. It says that in face of these conclusions, I deduced that some of this hype around this problem has its origins in the famous insatiable quest for novelty, for something other than what we have. Likewise, many that deny this reality as real do so out of their lack of satisfaction with their lives or with what they have become as individuals. Our frustrations have tendency to attribute responsibility to everything else but ourselves, to find answers that show how our choices were imposed to us, how we had not other path beyond the one we took. The assumption that this reality is not real, or what if, as you put it in a different context, is the ultimate of these excuses. I don't know if this fits in what you're saying, but I look forward to hear from you.
That's interesting. I think, go ahead.
Please, no, go ahead, Ellis.
I think that binding to reality is sort of the crux of it. Like you have to have some sort of binding to reality, or else, you're off over analyzing, over, moralizing, over emotionalizing. You got to have that grounding in reality, which is,
and losing the experience itself. Because imagine that it is all about you having an experience, right? Imagine just that. If that's the case, by keep searching to the very matrix of reality, you lose all of that experience because you're trying to find where you came from, but in a sense that is not relevant to the experience that you are living right now. If you focus, it's like receding. You create a something, and then to yourself you destroy the something that you created just to find what it is, right? So, did you follow me? Maybe I made it too complicated, but I think the point is that. So it's like
a good example.
It's like Gandalf says that if you have to destroy one thing in order to know how it works, you are completely missing the point, right? So
this is a very modern human problem too, so much so that, or an example of how much of a problem it is that the oldest tree in the world is hidden from people because there are those that would want to destroy it to find out
True.
What it looks like, if only. It reminds me too of the notion where we've kind of all grown up with, maybe not so much the younger people, but that materialism is the beginning of things, whereas what we're finding with quantum understanding of consciousness is that consciousness is the beginning, right? So it's almost
the
like
chicken or the egg. So
Right.
it's does the physical depend on the metaphysical first to exist, or does the material world appears without conceptualizing from a previous non-materialistic state, right? So I think it's a complicated question.
It is a very complicated question, and I think it gets even more fascinating and more complicated when we look at things like remote viewing, where, for instance, a remote viewer might look at what is planned to be looked at on Friday, and it's going to be presented by the private entity on Friday as a undisclosed bit of data to look at, but the remote viewer decides to look at what they're going to look at on Tuesday on the Friday before, and then they found it already.
Sure, and then the skeptics will come in and say, "Why are there people all filthy rich? Because if they can do OBE, out of body
Apparently,
experiences."
some can. What I've heard some of the foundational guys talk about, foundational in the US orientation anyway, is that when there is an emotional connection, it's hard to get clear answers. And so like really wanting some money, like it might make things come through a little.
Yeah, but what I find interesting about OBA, apart from all of that stuff, is that in that state, you have no time or place. You can either go to the past and see
Right.
the past, you can go to the future. There is no time or space when you are in that state. So, is it a confirmation of our real self being able to access this vast network of information and move across it and see it as a film playing instead of seeing what is really happening at that point in time? Or does it really go out of the matrix of time and then comes in to the matrix again to see those moments? You see my question? Is it all storage, or is it actually a removal yourself from this reality and entering in a different reality in a different point of time and space?
And I think the practitioners have concluded that it's unanswerable. But that there is something going on, because they can actually bypass space and time in kind of multiple formats, if you will.
And the headless, the ancients based that you studied, based some of the divination, they didn't call it OBE, right? But they had these visions, these sights of the future, of the past. So it's basically the same thing under a different name. No, I might be mistaken.
Right. No, they had all sorts of seers and people who had these visions. That was very common. This was one of the methods of healing that they used fairly commonly as well. There was a doctor that was connected to the spirit world that would be viewing your body, and medicine itself has always been linked to that until recently, owing to materialism. But if everybody wants to try something with me, let's do an experiment right now. So imagine there's a little man inside of your head at your left temple, and he wants to take a walk over to your right temple, right inside and through your frontal lobe. Just imagine for a second that guy walking from that point over to the other side. What moved? Did anything move?
In your question, did the man actually walk? Is that your question? Or
even if it's all a thought, where did that thought take place? What moved? What actually changed?
Well, I can only imagine in my brain, that is something that I try not to use, as electric signals going from one side to the other. Because as you know, the lobes are separated, but they have this cerebellum where both things are connected. Right? So it has to follow those pathways in order to go from one place to the other, like teleporting.
What did you construct the man out of? What was the base materials you used to imagine him into existence?
To be honest,
were they electronic signals?
I saw what I saw is a figure of a little man that I can't describe. It's too abstract, right? And then he is converted into this electromagnetic impulses and reappears on the other side of the brain. That's how I can describe it.
Do we have specific logic gates that were opened and closed for that specific person to come into existence? And how did your will just automatically, spontaneously construct this abstract figure? Well, these are kind of hard questions, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
first of all, we at the beginning of our trialogues, we were faced with the fact that some people can't imagine anything. So they would immediately fail this kind of experiment that you are doing, right? So, and they are still completely normal and completely functional humans. So that shows us that some of us are wired to imagination or to abstract concepts, and some of us just are not wired to be able to do it, because apparently their brain is completely the same as ours. They just can't imagine anything. They can't see any kind of image on their mind.
What if they had a different brain? What if that person that can't imagine had your body? Could they do it then, or would they still not be able to because they've never done it before?
That's an excellent question. Can a person learn to speak when he's created in a completely different culture that used no language, like the boy that they actually captured in the beginning of the 1900s, and they tried to educate him, and after many years he still didn't speak. He still wasn't able to understand the need for language, because I think that's the base why he didn't learn the language, is because he couldn't understand why it was needed, because in his world it wasn't needed.
It's interesting.
It's a very difficult concept, but if you can kind of see where I'm coming from, is that maybe all motion, all space, if there is something called consciousness that underlies this whole thing, and we just used our consciousness to create and then disintegrate a tiny abstract character that walked from one end of our skulls to the other, is that the same stuff that we're actually made of?
Oh yes, I see your point now, and I would agree. Everything is information in some form of state that creates this reality. We have no doubt about that. I don't think that there's anyone that doubts that everything that is physical that we use to experience this reality, our bodies included, is made of the same elements, of the same thing. It's like the ancient story that we are all stardust. Every single element that creates this reality was born in the explosion of a star. So what created the star in the first place? What was the first star? Where did that matter came from? And then we go into Terence McKenna. Give us just a tiny miracle that is the creation of all matter existent in the universe, and then we'll explain the rest.
So if I was going to point at this side of my forehead and then move it over to here, right? What moved if I'm made of the same stuff as the little guy who didn't go anywhere?
Anything.
It was all just electrical
Nothing.
impulses.
I was
Nothing.
thinking it's all made of mind. It was all mind. And I know
It
that
brings up
is
some really interesting problems.
that's a
Yes.
shortfall of an answer because it leads to more questions. But mind is the mover, and it is the moved. And where is it? Well, it's in its mind.
Well,
The mover
so
is the moved. The subject is the object.
we must remember that so far, although they try to say otherwise, there is not one shred of evidence that memory resides in the brain. None.
And that's the remote viewing trick too. Or well, that's the idea that a lot of practitioners have suggested too, that where are they getting this information from? Well, at some point in time, whatever they're looking at is known by someone or by everyone, and thereby they're getting it from mind, if you will.
Is
Again,
that-
it's not a perfect answer.
Is the base to what you're saying that old saying that if the tree falls in the forest and no one is there to see it, does it fall? Because what you're saying is he's accessing probably not a specific moment in time and place, but the information captured for the people that were there in that time and space, and can recreate then a 3D model of all of those inputs into one observable reality that he's experienced at that moment while he's doing the OBA experience. Does this fits with you, Headless?
I'm open to that kind of stuff, but I'm kind of skeptical. Like, I don't really take anything as, the answer, but
Sure, we're just speculating.
right. I've heard we are speculating, but to a point, right? Because there are certain things that we can know, And those certain things are that, if there is some sort of connection between thoughts and physical reality, that it should be able to be witnessed, right? Because that's the physical reality portion. So as we're making these things in non-physical space, somehow that can have an influence on physical reality.
But that's
So-
kind of taboo because
There's the
self-actuation.
conundrum. I'm
Go
sorry.
on, go on, Edith, go on. Edith.
There's a conundrum in the sense that you can't measure the man that we just moved, right? Did we move it? Well, that's another question. But can we measure what happened with mind? It can't be done. And in fact, that's why with remote viewing, they have usually at least one point of separation by just putting a sealed envelope of a coordinates and having someone look at that, right? Not a more direct kind of psychic practice would be going to the oracle and saying, hey, I have this problem and this specifically and me specifically, and what can I do? There's no like scientific regard for the separation to make sure that it's a psychic phenomena taking place. But with remote viewing, they tried to do that in several steps to make sure that they were actually tapping into that unmeasurable. And even the idea of remote viewing has been by measure and by skeptical science proven, if you will. The idea of remote influence has not been. And in part because it just can't be measured, because there's so many things that influence the reality, right? It's like, why did you fall when you were skateboarding? Well, I mean, there's so many variables going on. You can look at the tape.
But if you consider knowing who is calling you is a distant influence, if you consider the dog or the cat that knows exactly when its owner decides to come home, it is a distant influence.
Sure.
And that has been proven in probability, because the probability is too high in order for it to be random chance. But as I was saying to Headless, I think that all of this has been contradicted because of the concept of self-actuation. Because if you can indeed create your own reality, it removes the authority of the divine, which to me doesn't take it. But to these people, it means that then there is no God commanding our wills and our fates. That is not written because we can change it at will. We can create our own reality. And I think that's why this is so taboo from remote times, maybe not so much as recent times, but in past times it was denied because of that. To them, it was denying divine influence.
Well, it certainly does take a lot of agency away from authority when you think about how easy it is to interact with the base fundamental layers of the universe and start to change them. But here's an example of remote influencing, right? So if everybody could just tap their heads just like this real quick, just do that. I just remote influenced all of you, but there's really no way for me to prove that it was me that caused you to do that, because you had to make the choice, right? And let's say with the remote influencing situation, let's say that I am projecting my thoughts at something like a vase, and then I cause that vase to fall off of the shelf that it's on. Now, did I actually do it, or did I predict it? Was I just predicting that it would fall off and I had no actual ability to push it?
Is it deja vu or is actually actuation?
Right. Who knows? Right? Like, are we predicting how things are going to be influenced?
Scientifically, you had to look at it. Okay, is there any way that vase would have fallen by itself without me trying to put it down? Is there wind? Is there something knocking it out? So if there isn't, then there is a very high probability that it was your thought that put the vase down, right?
Right.
So,
But even the scientist would fully admit that unknown force or whatever isn't necessarily the only way that you could remote influence that object, right? So if they're being scientific, they would have to understand too that, hey, if there was no explanation for why a gust of wind came up all of a sudden in somebody's house and caused that thing to fall over, that's something you've isolated out in your attempt to figure out.
Well, that's another thing, because the layers, as you are bringing it, the layers never end, because then
Right.
there was a gush of wind that turned the thing down, right? And then you have to question, did I create the gush of wind in order to create physical interaction? Because from where I am, I can't touch it, right? So was the wind caused by my request to knock that down, or was it just an accident? And then things get complicated, right?
And it
Right.
does
So,
lead to the uncertainty of all these connections, but it also leads to one certainty, that is, everything is connected,
Of
right?
course.
How the connection is taking place through the wind, through the mind, through some force that's not spatial necessarily definable in those terms, or any number of considerations, but the certainty is connection.
As was mentioned in the comments by someone saying sound, I would call it frequency, because sound is more associated with what we can hear, actually. But everything is vibrating in a specific frequency, and it's the relation between those vibrations from quantum level to macro level that allow this reality to exist. So without that vibration, none of what we see, none of what we are would exist, because everything vibrates at a specific frequency. And is the harmony, and that's the miracle of this reality, is that none of those vibrations act against each other. They are all actuating in symbiotic shape. Even when a meteor comes and destroys the planet, it was symbiotic. It was not destructive, because in order to interact with one another, they have to be in resonance. Otherwise, they couldn't work. It wouldn't exist, because in this reality, anything that it doesn't correlate or have some kind of symbiosis with our reality, we don't see it. It doesn't exist, right? As for instance, going into Headless, your area of the supernatural or influences. Those things are outside of this reality. They have to change themselves in order to interact with us or to decide to appear. Or so, considering how limited our senses are in every single one of them. They are very limited, right? So who determines why we are so limited? Is it so that we don't get crazy? Instead, for instance, if we could see all light frequencies, would go mad. How we would work on this world? We had to narrow that to a specific band of frequency that is very narrow in all the light spectrum in order to work and see this reality as we do. Otherwise, it would be chaos to try and evolve in when we could see absolutely everything, right?
here's a good question then. So, would you say that fewer thoughts opens one up to more possibilities? Because what you're describing is sort of like a cultural angle limiting our ability to see the world for as it is. So, if we had fewer and fewer thoughts in our head, we would have fewer and fewer limiting thoughts that would take away our ability to see beyond what we see now, because we essentially limit ourselves in ways that we don't fully even realize.
Sure, imagine a
Well,
game. So we all try to replicate God, right? So when you go into a open world game, right, you are playing God, because you are recreating a universe, doesn't matter how big it is, where you can move yourself through the use of an avatar that is inside the game, right? But even then, you are limiting yourself to what that avatar can see. You are not controlling the whole world and knowing what everybody is doing in that world, be it NPCs or the characters or whatever. You're narrowing your fraction of actuation and observation in that virtual world. which is basically the same thing that we experience here. And sorry, I interrupted you, Ethan.
No, great build, Ricardo. I was just going to say that I think it's the quality of one's thoughts, whether they are clouding or enhancing the potential of what we might observe as reality, or observe and gain information from. Right, the blundering materialism that is so often the main point of focus, especially when you're in lack, right? You might focus more on obtaining material goods, rightly so, when you're in lack. So it's the way the world is designed is kind of to keep us focusing on really base thoughts that do not help us expand our mind, if you will.
And our science was limited in the same way, because when you had, for instance, a natural philosopher going and looking into a piece of stone, he would look at from a geological point of view. He would look for any marks of language, of imagery, of transformation. He would then relate all of that with mythology, with oral tradition, with mysticism. It would include astronomy. It would include everything to try and explain why that rock was there. Today, you have a geologist that will look at the rock and say, "Oh, this is granite." Period. Right? And then there has to become the guy that is the expert in language to determine if there is any language there, or just some scrolls that someone did, or it's just probably natural. And then it has to come the guy that knows of archaeoastronomy and try to relate the orientation of that to something, right? So and this divides all our information into sectors. What I'm trying to say is, the less knowledge you have, the less you see. So from what you're saying, Ethan, is if we go out and we look at something that we don't know what it is, we'll not recognize for its potential of the reason why it was made. So the way that we interact with our reality is as a direct relationship to what we know in regards to what we see. So if you bring someone from there is this French movie called Les Visiteurs with Jean Reno, and they are transported from the Middle Ages by accident, by a portal, into present day France. And so they don't understand what a car is, they don't understand what a phone is, they're looking at it, and to them it means nothing. And when people start using those things, they consider it's just some kind of black magic, because it's the only way they have to interact with things they don't know. Anything that you don't understand in terms of technology becomes magic. And in this case, when you are a Catholic, everything is black magic, because everything comes from the devil, right? So what I mean is, knowledge also determines your ability to understand your reality, what surrounds you, where are you, and what everything means or could mean around you. So a person that has no education in whatsoever, his perspective will be narrower than the person that has a vast knowledge in different disciplines and can look at something and determine what he's seeing. So that's why you go to a psychologist instead of going to the baker to speak about your problems, because he will have a basis to interpret what you're saying and have something to say about it. While the baker will have just common knowledge, and I'm talking about the common baker. I'm not diminishing the bakers. It's just an allegory. The baker could only relate it to his own experience. Could be vast, but it's just his experience and not the experience of several authors that took many years to study from different angles. So I'm sorry, I'm getting out of track here, but I'm just trying to make that
No,
point.
I think that's a very interesting point. That's the power of analogy, because he would have to analogize his own experiences to make it clear to you what you should do in your psychological problem. So he might actually have a better answer that's more relatable than the guy who spent all of these years specializing and over saturating his mind with a bunch of stuff that might not be as effective as what the advice a baker would offer.
Sure. Not that it didn't bring wisdom. I'm just saying it's not whole embrangement of multi-experience knowledge, but centered in just one lifetime.
Right,
So,
right. And that kind of brings me up to my topic, which is
sure.
you have to make stuff. So this week, I keep trying to upload the picture of my easel, but I'm probably just going to have to pick up the computer and point it over there. So this week, I went out into the woods and I grabbed a tree out of the swamp. And I made this bad boy out of it. See that easel? Right
Oh,
there?
oh,
It's a big ass piece of birch that I chopped up into pieces and put together into
How
a
did you
easel.
make the what would it be called? The flat holder.
That is a slab of metal being held up by two big ass screws, big ass lag bolts.
so
Go.
we just want to say that no tree was harmed during the production of this video. It was already dead.
It was not dead. I used a fresh one, but it wasn't doing so good in the swamp. And there's a lot of birch trees here. They're anything but endangered. So I figure I'd give it a good home because it could fall there and die, or it could be used for something and eventually get put back into the earth. But the point I was trying to make is that sometimes intelligence needs to be stimulated with work, right? These two things go together. So when your mind is producing these thoughts and your arms and your hands are carrying them out, you actually build and grow this experiential knowledge, and it actually relates your soul a little bit more to the land that you're on. It's grounding, right? And once you've completed something, it builds momentum. So all of these concepts sort of come together through the act of making something that is only ever going to have as deep a meaning to you. Nobody else is going to have that deep meaning with it. So if you try and sell it, it's still not going to have the same meaning. And also, it's 100% unique. Nobody else can have it. So there's no way anybody else can make something identical to what I just made, because it is 100% personal and 100% from my experience. And if you think about it, every forest has that element to it. It's 100% unique from every other forest, even though you'll find the same species growing in other places. All of these experiences that the trees and the woods are having are 100% unique to that forest. And so are we. We're all sort of unique in that way. Maybe
Sure, and we are free to
understanding that,
experience it differently and obtain different results from it. So
right?
I have a friend that is an author, and I keep saying to him, "Yeah, but you should explain who this person is, or just or how it looks like in an image." And he says, "No, I refuse myself to do that, because if I explain it," and he also makes music, and say, "If I explain the music, then I'm reducing it to one meaning. While if I don't, everyone that listens it can create their own meaning. There is no matrix to take from it. It's free for interpretation." So I think it fits more or less what Ati's saying, that if we don't have a specific narrative that says what you are going to experience is this, then you are free to have your own experience, and it's unique. It's yours. It's just yours. It has no more. It can have significance to others, right? But you have to explain it. They cannot feel the same thing that you do.
Right, which goes back in some ways to the question of limiting thoughts, right? When you complete something, you eliminate limiting thoughts, right? So you're actually getting some of that baggage off just by completing a project. Doesn't matter what it is. Make it a little creative, make it a little whatever. By completing that thing, you have eliminated a limiting thought that could have existed potentially, which is you can't do this.
Sure.
Right?
And we know that several of the greats died because they refused to get up from the work that they're doing until it's done.
Right.
And they died there from problems derived from not going to the bathroom, not eating, not drinking, but they completed the work and then they died because that's what they had to do. They have to finish it. I will. And how many of us, either
I'll
gamers
rest when I'm
or
dead.
Yeah, or writers, when we're doing something, we don't want to stop. I just want to finish it before I do anything else. So I
This
understand.
obsession is possibly what differentiates humankind from the rest of the animal world, right? Like we literally are looking beyond our own comfort and existence when we focus on a project. And forgive me, Kelly just had a little comment that made me think of this idea. Of course, I'm obsessed with four, so she made me in her play on words, inform et ion, information. She made me think of how both the mental subject that we were focusing on of this quantum mind and from where does information come from, and the physical production and creation of a project also contains this four-dimensional quality, the four worlds of the Kabbalah: emanation, creation, formation, and finally fabrication, right? And with the dimension of the mind and psychic nature, there's this emanation going on, right? That you just have to um, connect with in some manner, whether it's beyond space and time in one manner or another, we're not too sure, but that there is a connection beyond space and time, we can be sure. And same thing with your creation of your art for art, which is dope. Headless, right, is bringing that creation into fabrication, that the idea manifest from these natural objects into formation and
And
fabrication.
to me, one of the most baffling things in human culture is what gives value to art, right? Because I look into some of the pieces that are evaluated in millions, and I think, well, I could get a 4-year-old and with a piece of paint, and he will do that. It's just when did the name started to become the value instead of the art itself, right? Because, for instance, I don't understand contemporary classic music because they're trying to be so different from what the classic composers did that it's just a mass of sounds. I understand that intellectually that might mean something in terms of difficulty, of complexity, of scales, of harmonies. I understand that, but it's still very unpleasant to the ear. It's not harmonic at all, right? In terms of
They
art,
were pursuing a nuance so hard that they veered off course.
completely.
Sorry to
And
interrupt.
yeah, you're correct. And in terms of art, I look to contemporary, what they call contemporary art, and it's terrible. It's just something that is, what is the meaning of that? It's just scrambling paint all over the place with no reasoning, no nothing, right? And that can be brought into sculpture. That's now some aberrant figures that are being created in terms of contemporary artists, and still, if you have a name in the art world, no matter what you do, it will worth millions. While you have people creating art that has no name, and probably the piece that we are looking is much more harmonious, is much more emotional to observe. It tells us much more than that has an enormous cost. So I think even in art, we lost the sight of name versus artistry, and the values are mere speculation and become a business instead of becoming a celebration of the artist itself, right? Because when I think it's Dali, that when he woke up he would say, what is the great Dali going to create today? He spoke on the third person, but we look at his art and we can see that there is humanity in there, there is emotion, there is spirituality, there is something there, right? And and he was convinced that he was the greatest, but he was good. We cannot deny it, right? And he created that name. Today we see those names out of a rich guy that look at that in a gallery and said, "Ooh, this is amazing." And the next one comes and they do a series of paintings with the same designs, right? And they form a name, and 2 or 4 series later is on millions because someone said it was good. not because everyone went there and said, this is magnificent, I can't get out of here, I can't stop looking at this painting. It's not that. It's that this critic or this rich guy that is a known collector said it was good. So even in there we have the. Sorry, I think I'm verging out of what you're meaning, but and
No, I
ranted
think
a little bit. But
you're dead on, because there are two types of speculators in this world: speculators that never make any money, and then the speculators who lie to make billions and billions of dollars. And what you're talking about is the art that requires that type of speculation, right? Then you got the philosophical speculation that doesn't make any money. You got the metaphysical speculation and the occult speculation. That's not making you any money either. So if you're a speculator who lies, you can make a fortune. But if you're one of the other types, conspiracy speculation, get out of here, buddy. We don't want that around us.
sure, and I think one of the examples of how easy is to manipulate the. I don't want to offend anyone, but the people that are somehow disturbed in their lives is when I see all of these advertisements on YouTube of self-aid courses. Come on, give us $3,000 and we'll teach you to be a rich person, or we'll teach you to be a wise person, or whatever. And people actually pay money to these people, and they actually go there without understanding that of the 300 or 3,000 that go there, they will select one or two of those people only that have the characteristics to continue the scam.
Right.
All the rest will go home realizing, oh, I failed again. They gave me all opportunities, my fault. It's never their fault. So they did explain things. I just can't do it. I have to go to the next self-aid course and try to get myself better. So it's again what I read in the beginning. The blame is something that is sometimes recognized, but is always placed because of conditioning, right? It's never the true self that doesn't decide to grow up or to evolve, because people just don't have the time to that. I have to work and I have to do this and I have to do that. How I have time to learn about this subject or that? I don't. I'm too obsessed with this, and besides this game is going to get on 7 o'clock, right? And I need some beers or some booze, and I'm happy. I forget everything during that period. I even have these strong emotions, right, about these people getting thousands of dollars a month when I get nothing, and I'm celebrating because I have some connection that I can't understand to this team, right? So,
and I think a lot of this comes from a really poor pattern that a lot of us run in. I don't want to say or be misleading, but in a kind of juvenile mindset, whether we're old or young, and we'll kind of put off our own responsibility for ourselves, right? We are
because you're doing our best. We are already doing our best. So
well, there's any number of ways that we can deduce what's happening, and I think we're not at fault necessarily with the gravity of the world to what you're saying, but we want to have someone else be responsible for us, whether it's a leader by way of government or a program by way of medicine, or and like you said, a program for the self-development on how to make money or how to be a better XYZ, instead of just like really focusing on total responsibility.
I am the best XYZ there is. We'll put that out there.
And I'm going to be making a presentation of an XYZ program for all those who are not up to par with Headless. No, but I think that putting off responsibility for ourselves is a big part of this, leniency on others to help us or make it right, instead of just doing what we need to do, right? Like that complicated series of instructions may have some pertinent information, but more important is to do the daily grind often enough, and we shirk that responsibility. A daily grind may be as simple as just some physical exercise to make sure that we're operating decently, if you will.
Incorporate that body.
With the art too, and Ricardo, you know this in sharing your writing. I feel like ideas, especially, are catalyzed by some kind of piranha effect, and it's like no idea is necessarily the best. The best idea is not necessarily the one that is popular. There's some kind of algorithmic characteristic um, um, trait that leads people to different ideas, and making different things popular, and they may not be of any quality at whatsoever, but there's different people that have influence and so on and so forth, but there's some kind of thing that happens that gets people to really
Sure. So,
catalyze it.
which leads to what is the origin? What is the real origin of trends?
Yeah,
How does
right.
it? How does it happen? Right?
I don't know.
When you live in a system that will tell you this is the album of the year. This is the best music being produced. This is the best theater at the moment. This is the best movie. This is the best series. It's not a matter of go and check for yourself and see if you like. They're already telling you this is the thing that is trending now. This is the thing that everybody is watching. Right? For instance, I know that
There's
the record
please.
the record company in Portugal, when we listen in the radio, this is a golden disc. It doesn't mean that enough people went to stores and bought the disc to make it a golden disc. It means that the company that is selling the discs made a business with great surfaces that bought enough discs to put on sale that grants it the status of golden disc. So it's an investment that is then advertised as already consumed, and people go for it because if there is thousands of people buying it, probably it's because it's good. It's already a golden disc or it's platinum disc, when it has nothing to do with sales. It has to do with gross amounts of product being placed on sale by the own investment of the company and not by the public buying it. So this is one of the ways they manipulate public opinion. We are constantly saying your clothes, your music, your everything, right? How you should look, how you have to fit into this or that group. It's all a matter of secularism dividing. It's like every single person that tries to think different is somehow caught in some system net that then limits it to that predicted and controlled sector of society that they think it's independent.
Right. Well, I was thinking a little bit along the lines of meditation when it comes to limiting thoughts. And the one thing that meditation is really dependent on is the ability to hold your attention. So if you're thinking about nothing and you're trying to keep thoughts out of your head, there's one thing to really keep in mind, which is emotional status. So the emotions you feel, no matter how big or small, will trigger certain thoughts in your head, which will create that negative feedback loop of, oh, I just can't think of nothing.
Yep. Then
Well,
you are focusing in thinking of nothing, but you are thinking because you are thinking of nothing, right? So
right.
There is
So it's really hard to turn off.
There's an idea in the Tibetan understanding of mind and specifically thought and emotion that thoughts are like dew. There's 1,000 of them going, thousands. There's all kinds of things going on. Emotion is like water, and it just comes together and goes to the lowest point and settles. So emotion is kind of like one still thing, where thoughts are just any number, like Headless with the mental exercise. of the man in our mind moving from one side to the other, we could do that while thinking of Jupiter and the moon and our grandmother, and we could do all that at the same time.
Sure.
So emotion and thought are very similar, but emotion is like a pool of water, and it's very much settled. Whether it's made up of two different emotions, it could be, or more than that, but thoughts are just everywhere.
So
thoughts seem to be centered in the brain area. Emotions are not centered in that brain area. They're really strong emotions when you can feel them in your body or different parts of you. Right? That's a main difference.
And can you feel or sense, maybe is a better term, the thoughts of someone that you're near, or the emotions of someone that you're near, without any words being exchanged? What's easier? Emotions, of course, right? So it's a much more forceful thing.
That's why I defend that the less we think with our brain and the more we think emotionally, we get closer to what I call the real self. Because the more you think, the more mistakes you're going to do, because you're overthinking. You're constantly thinking of it, and that will limit your perception, right? So it's like that. There is this joke that I'm trying to make really short. There is a guy in the middle of a stormy night in a very desert road, has a flat, and he wants to go and change the tire, and he realizes he doesn't have a jack. So he is in the middle of the night, quite stormy, and he doesn't have a jack. So his life doesn't seem very good at that moment. But he sees a light, a faint light of a house almost in the horizon. He said, well, if I go walking in 2 hours, I can get to that house, ask for someone to lend me a jack or bring me back to the car, and I'll fix the car and it's done. The problem is he has 2 hours walking in the middle of the storm, miserable, going there. So he keeps thinking, well, this guy's, it's this time of the night. This guy is not going to lend me the jack. Oh, of course he is. Why wouldn't he? I'm in the dire situation. No, he won't give you. He's going to tell you to fuck off. So these people would not tolerate. And so he keeps feeding these thoughts constantly. And when he finally reaches there and knocks on the door, this very, despite the time of the night, this very kind person opens the door and says, good night, can I help you? And the guy turns to him and says, you fed the fucking jack up your ass, and turns around and goes away without even making the question, because he already seen all the sceneries where he's going there on these 2 hours, thinking to himself how he's going to do it. So I think it fits on what you were saying. It and we shouldn't use our brains to think. And when you say, Headless, that your thoughts are in your head, is it the thoughts that are in your head, or is it the signals that represent the understanding of those thoughts to that body that are in your head, right? Is it receiving some signals that translate to those thoughts, or are those actually the thoughts themselves, right?
Well, if there is that concept of non-local consciousness, then in essence, everybody's remote viewing right now. There's just something about this body that keeps
absolutely
us seeing what we keep seeing. So,
absolutely.
I think the remote viewers talk about it as a sixth and a seventh sense. The sixth being, or well, one of the original remote viewers, I should say. They talk about the sense of ambiance. Right. And this they don't even refer to as psychic, but this is what they taught. One in particular individual, I believe Lynn something or other, talks about the sixth sense as being the understanding of the ambiance. And we've all experienced that, right? It's like the idea of, do you sense the emotion of your friend or the thought of your friend? You just, the ambiance is there. And then psychic, seventh sense, is picking up more specifics in regards to that. And it's interesting that all meditators, all psychics, and actually in the telepathy tapes, all the kids, they all have a practice of shutting off the mind so that they can use the mind more efficiently. And it reminds me of an analogy. I call it the analogy of the sandflies, but I don't know if it's called that. But there is a man who is walking on the beach, and he comes up to a group of sandflies, and they're all buzzing furiously around and going crazy and up and down and writhing and writhing, and he keeps on walking, and he's observing, and he's like, wow, those little insects, they live like a day or a week, or I don't even know, but not long, and they spend all their time just hopping around crazy. Those things are in a poor state. And on the way back, he observes the sandflies again, and this time he stops. And when he stops, he realizes that they were only reacting to his presence when they were furiously jumping about and being strange and wasting their energy. They had a whole thing going on, a bunch of different relationships of what they were doing together without his disturbance. So it's like we have to shut off our own presence sometimes to really understand what's going on.
Were those bugs his actual thoughts? Is that an
Right,
allegory?
right. I think that's worthy of comparison, right? That if we can just turn off the sandflies that are talking about
Stop.
what
Stop.
does Bobby think, what does Sherry think, where's Stephanie, and what do I need this month, and just get rid of the sandflies, all of a sudden you'll realize you're on the most beautiful piece of Earth in the solar system, and
Sure.
things come.
It's like Bill Hicks saying that I'm watching the news and it's all doom and gloom and war and death and crime, and I'll go to my window and the birds are pew 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 pew. What's going on here? And I look at the television. It's war, gloom, terror. What is this? So it's all a
like
matter of
that they're injecting more sandflies into our system, right?
completely, exactly that.
We have to look at them as sandflies, right? So the sandflies are doing their own thing when we're not observing them, right? So when we do observe them, we get the version of them that is all freaked out and terrorized and everything else because we're disturbing them. But they're supposed to be doing a job. So maybe all of that trauma and fear and everything else in your own life that may be associated with all of these things that you're watching on the news could be coming from a different source. And so you kind of displace your own sandflies into a basket where they're probably not doing you any good, you know? So
And
they're doing good on their own.
and perspective, because if you think how we looked at the solar system in the in the Earth-centric system, they were looking at it exactly as they observed. Everything moves around the Earth, right? It took a leap out of ourselves in
Yeah.
order to understand that, after all, we are the ones going around like everything else, a central sun, and that central sun again was known after that also is going about something else, and that something else is also revolving around something else until massive clusters of galaxies swirling around each other, and then we go further back in time and we see those gigantic quasars and so on. So it's like a certain how do I say it? A fractality of perception, that each layer we as soon as we move are able to move a level up, we have a different perspective of what we're looking at. So, and I was associating that with the bugs, because when you look them from your perspective, they are random and they seem crazy, right? But when you stop and look from their perspective, they are heavily organized and they are all struggling for either a common goal or an individual goal all at the same time. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Fascinating.
I have time just to read what I brought for today.
Please.
So let me go to it. So this is from my latest paper, that is called, and I have to go and see the title because I can't remember, The Silence of the Ocean, a False Dogma of Isolation. So let me go back to what I was going to read, a small chapter.
It's an intriguing title. I like it.
Just a second. Okay, so this is a part at the page 24 of 33, and it says beyond uniformitarianism, and it says like this: modern science prides itself on its principle of uniformity. The natural laws are constant through time, yet in practice, it violates the very principle when it comes to human potential. It assumes that ancient peoples were cognitively inferior, that their tools and institutions determine their capacities. This is the unspoken dogma that sustains myth of isolation, the belief that pre-modern man was less intelligent, less daring, less curious. But the archaeological record refutes it at every turn. To build the Pyramid of Egypt or Teotihuacan, to align temples with solstice, to map the heavens without telescopes, these acts demand intellect, coordination, and abstract reasoning equal to any modern achievement. If such minds could conceive geometry and astronomy, could they not also conceive navigation? The cognitive continuity of our species is the foundation of actualism. What man can imagine, man can attempt, and what he attempts, he sometimes succeeds. And it goes further, but I will stop here just to not take too much time for us. So this is related to the fact that we as alternative researchers are often labeled as racists because we determined that the other peoples were primitive, when in fact, by using their own terminology, we find that they are the ones determining the man primitive, because instead of seeing a global civilization that disseminates information and knowledge, and then these groups, when they become more or less isolated, develop their own culture based on the same principles, and that's why we find the same things all over the globe at the same period of time in terms of technological achievements, right? And they say to us that no, they all got to there at the same time. They all took the same conclusions, and instead of being one people that was highly evolved back then, or in a different way that we are, but they all also connected somehow. So not sure if you want to comment anything about this. It's a little bit off topic, I know, but that's what
I like it. There's this element where if you're saying that the world was more connected than it was, then that makes you a racist, which I find really, really interesting, because in essence, what they're saying is if they were all primitive and they were all scattered and not talking to one another, that would be superior in their mind, right?
Sure.
Because they're still making these judgments. So in essence, they want people to be more like their model of ancient humans, which are disconnected, incapable, only looking at stones, only looking at the bare minimal materialism in front of them. And then anytime they do anything confusing, they can label that as being a ritual site or one of these other pejoratives that they have for things that they don't want to examine too hard. By telling us that our value judgment that things were probably connected is wrong, they're essentially saying that your view of nature, your view of spirituality, your view of all these things, it's not only wrong today, but it was wrong when they were doing it back then. Ritual sites, those are stupid. Everything you do is stupid. And it's just, it's kind of a demoralization campaign when they come up with, hey, saying the world was more connected makes you racist.
Well, it has another aspect in terms of when you talk about America or the Americas, is that if they weren't primitive, if they weren't connected, then we can claim it under religious laws and under the notion that we are going to give them civilization, right? The problem is when we start looking at the past before Columbus in the Americas, is that a civilization already existed. They were very advanced in terms of mathematics, in terms of astronomy, in terms of how our society should rule itself. They were advanced in all fashions, and in order to claim ownership over the land, it is determined by their own laws that the people that are there must be scarce, primitive, and educated, and therefore we can say that we are the saviors. We are taking this country and we are changing their lives for the better according to our own conception. So
Right, but it's like the Atlantis thing. That's where people get called racist the most. So in the 1800s, there were people who were saying that maybe this Aryan master race came from Atlantis. And they say that's why thinking that the world is connected makes you racist, is because people in the 1800s wrote about these different cultures being connected through Atlantis. And therefore, that makes you a racist for thinking that people who are connected are exist or whatever, racist. And it's really bizarre, but that's the line of thinking that was brought out during many Joe Rogan debates. It's like, you believe in Atlantis, therefore racism.
well, America reached the moon thanks to a Nazi. Well, in fact, to a team of Nazis, right? So
Right.
without them, it would take them much longer because they didn't have the technology. So does that make Nazi a racist?
Yes. But they don't want to talk about it. They will apply all of these things uniformly and say, yeah, well, NASA, they would have to be racist. But I don't want to say that because that can cause people to pull funding. So I'm going to start punching down instead of punching up. Right. So since I'm an anthropologist, I've got my degree. I'm going to punch down at people I claim do not belong in the system because I'm exerting my power. And by exerting my power, I can keep people out. And that's really what I'd like to do. But again, these are value judgments that are intrinsic in the activities that they're doing, not necessarily on the face easily recognizable. You've got to sort of understand their position and understand that relationship to everything else to really get it.
And there may have been different reasons for different individuals to kind of obfuscate information, if you will, to uplift or put down one or another group. But I think as it goes more broadly with the institutions, it would be as simple as keeping our consciousness low so that we're dependent on their modality, whatever it is that they put forth, because we know that there's nothing else has been better in all of history, right? Because they tell us that there wasn't a time where there wasn't peasant and royal. But in fact, maybe there were more equitable times when people were more connected broadly, instead of, through.
That relates to what is to be called advanced. What is an advanced civilization? Is it one as ours that we are completely dependent on electricity, that are still using huge control explosions in order to fly or to go into space, right? Or is a civilization that everyone is respected, where education is prized, where knowledge is defended?
I'm sorry, Ricardo. Tyrone brings up this subject too frequently. He often questions, what does one define as a civilization? And I think there's so many ways to look at it. But isn't it interesting that today we talk about having a civilization, but yet where is the clean water? This should be a basic fundamental of any sane civilization, is to have clean water for their biological constructs to continue, whether it's the animals in the wild, livestock, and us. Like, we don't even have institutions that focus on the bare minimum of having clean water. It's not even considered. I almost sound silly bringing it up.
You remind me of the general. I think he was a general on Kubrick's film, that our bodily fluids are being perturbed.
Right. Yeah, that's what's the name of the movie? Kubrick's film.
Dr.
I can't-
Lovegood or something. I
Dr.
can't remember.
Strangelove.
Dr. Strangelove. Thank you. It's the
Right. Well,
corruption of our bodily fluids. That's why I'm
and
gonna drop a nuclear bomb, cause a nuclear war, clean the population, and then we can start over without perturbing our bodily fluids.
yeah, and we should at least have access to clean water and clean air and food that doesn't poison us, right? If we're going to call ourselves
Yeah,
civilized or a
but
civilization.
then you have the leader of Nestle that I don't know if he still is, but he
Ah,
was in the 2000s when I watched the video where he was explaining to everybody that wants to listen to him why water should be privatized, why water is not an essential, how to
a
say
right.
it, and it's an
He said
essential
it's not a right, right?
right of every earthling. You explain from all these reasons why he should be allowed to own water and sell it to every single one of us because it's a commodity as anything else in his perspective. So he failed, luckily, but he did try it. So
Well, it is interesting. We really broadly accept the idea of one owning land, right? But when it comes to water, we haven't got there yet. But they're pushing it because that's where they're going, right? And there are certainly local state limitations on water usage, notoriously in drier areas. But
sure, look, the primitive Moors allowed the conquered by them to keep their faith, to own land, and to trade at their will as long as they pay a small tax for not being Muslims, right? And these people chose to change and fight that system in order to go back into vassalage, in order to no longer have ownership over land, to have to work all of their lives for their Lord and give, instead of 10%, 90% of what they did, of what they produced to the Lord, right? And people fought for this.
they were then not responsible. They could give away their responsibility. Is that why they chose it?
I have no idea because I don't understand that part of history. It's like this idea of nationalism, right? And in this case, nationalism for a country that didn't exist yet, because I'm talking about Iberia and Portugal, and they were fighting for a new country where they would be placed under vassalage. So
Yeah, that's
if this isn't stupid and this isn't hard to understand how those people were thinking back then,
so they must have had the idea that they were going to be taken care of in some way, right? No.
because they had at least 2 or 3 generations to realize that they were in a much better system, that they now were owners of their own lives, right? Because
Yeah.
no one was forcing them to change religion. In fact, they were given land that they conquered. They were given the land if they wanted to work. Okay, we give you land. It's your land now. Here's the papers. This is your land. And they chose to trade that to no ownership at all, right? And to work as slaves for the rest of their lives, because basically vassalage, that's what it is. Everything you produce is for your lord. You don't own anything. So whatever you trade, you have to pay massive taxes to your lord because every business belongs to him. So, and people change, and this happened all over Europe. And the Moors were not the only ones that didn't care of what you do. As long as you pay a tax, they didn't care. They just want to own the territory. So
Well, I think a lot of it goes to the illusion of sovereignty. Like we have that really, really hard in America. You have a major illusion of sovereignty. And back then, if you didn't have a sovereign, if your guy wasn't the sovereign, you didn't have sovereignty. So they were looking at the Moors in a lot of the ways that the Americans looked at the British. They might have had it better under the British tax system than we have it today. And if it only came down to the material resources, I think that's what they would have stuck with. But instead, they were like, we need our guy to exercise sovereignty over this territory, so that we're not under somebody who could change their mind or whatever. But it's just as easy for one of our guys to change their mind as opposed to one of their guys. You know?
Yeah, but today you can be a Catholic and move into a Muslim country or a Buddhist country or a Muslim moving into a Catholic country, and you live your own life, right? But back then, and according to what you say, it seems that they were thinking like, this is God's land and their God is not my God. So this is God's will. It's the divinity of rulership. We are not supposed to be leaders of our own lives. That's not how
It's not how the good book says it.
exactly. So all of these factors that nullify the self in a way that it doesn't profit to anybody, because then he changes his life and then he starts to be upset because he's a slave once more and has to work to the Lord. But at least God is happy, so everything must be well, right? So
Well, back then, reading the Bible was really off limits. So anything anybody said that they're claiming came from the Bible was pretty much it. But it really does say slaves obey your masters at least 5 times in the New Testament. So that's
and there was a huge
passage.
a huge amount of faith. I keep going back to this bishop that was in a siege, and the leader of the troops came to him and said, "My lord, we just found that there are Christians within the walls." And he said to him, "Kill them all." Yeah, but didn't you hear me? There are Christians within the walls. There's lots of them, children, women. Kill them all. God will know what is his own. So tell me, is this a tremendous act of faith that he believes that this life is just transient and our rightful place is on God's grounds in heaven? Or is this a complete maniac sociopath with no respect whatsoever for life, but in order to destroy everything? Right? I am more inclined to the second one, but I might be wrong.
I think you're right with the latter. I've heard stories of how they various wars, kings leading the wars, ran into different aspects of that where they were one religion or another, and they would convert them before they massacred them.
Before, so they can go to heaven.
Yeah.
So that they can go to heaven, or that it wouldn't be a sin for them to be killed by their own army, right? Change their religion. They're converted. They then can be killed, and no sin unto those who kill them.
Arius. That reminds me of Arius. So have you ever heard of the Arian heresies? This was one of the first heretical cases in Christianity, where this guy Arius goes up and he's the missionary to the Vandals and the Goths and all the rest of them. And he's preaching his own form of non-disconnected Trinitarianism. So, the Father is not the same thing as the Son, is not the same thing as the Holy Spirit. So by the time the Council of Nicaea kicks off, they decide that the Arian heresy, this guy teaching people that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are disconnected and not the same entity, was enough for them to go in there and start stealing everybody's gold because they were guilty of heresy. So they had to steal all the Goths' gold because they believed that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were different and not all the same thing. So
completely understandable. So
Isn't
gold does have a value. Ideology, not so much. So, and ours is much better than his. So we can use it as an excuse to go there and sack everything.
excellent weapon.
They're thus guilty when they had a non-Trinitarian viewpoint that was acceptable. Guilty, and then you can take whatever you want.
Sure, and it fits exactly what I was saying about the Americas, because as long as it was sparsely unoccupied and by primitive people, they could come in with the purpose of what? Giving them Christ. So as long as we can give Christ to these people, we can just kill them all and take over the land and eradicate everything that they had, as they did in South America. They destroyed practically everything that they have. So it is what made the world that we see today. So, and going back to what we all were saying, I think that my concept of when they say that we only use 10% of our brain, some say that. I think that it's the other way around, is we do have 10% of residual consciousness on our brain, and we can work in this reality through those 10% or whatever it is of consciousness, but that's not us. That's just a very limited version of us. So if I can keep you in your brain into those 10% of awareness, I can control you much better if you are, in other words, illuminated and have a broader concept of reality that transcends what is being given to you to accept, right? So that's why the reason we see all these diversions, this new Rome circus, that is the games, the sports, the movies, the theater, the music, all of these are, instead of, as just in the circus of Rome, that was just a diversion to calm the people, in this is not only to do that, but conduct you in a certain line of thought and action into this reality that doesn't make you see yourself as a much broader entity than just those 10% that is the physical you.
The tide kind of got switched around on us. We've only got 10% to ourselves now. The rest of the 90, that belongs to other people, and they keep wanting more and more of that 10% that we got left. This is a good episode. Thank you guys for joining us again. Another Trialogue, and lots of thought-provoking stuff. Make sure to join us next time and check out my alchemy show tomorrow with Arrows Up.
Absolutely.
See you later, guys.
Bye-bye.